The auctioneer's voice cut through the dusty Wyoming air like a whip crack. What am I bid for this one? Strong back, can cook, clean, quiet as a church mouse. Laughter rippled through the crowd as Elena Ward stood trembling on the wooden platform, her father's hand gripping her shoulder like a vice. Caleb Ward spat tobacco juice into the dirt. She eats too much, but she'll work hard enough if you keep her in line. The shame burned hotter than the August sun. Then a voice, low, rough as gravel, broke through the jeering. $200 cash. The crowd fell silent. A mountain man stepped forward, and Elena's life changed forever. Before we begin this journey together, I invite you to stay with us until the very end. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and comment below with your city. I love seeing how far these tales travel across the world. The morning Elena Ward was sold, the sky over Prescott Station hung low and gray, pregnant with a storm that wouldn't break. She'd known this day was coming, had felt it in her bones the way animals sense earthquakes before the ground starts shaking. Her father had been muttering about it for weeks, ever since the failed wheat harvest left him desperate and mean. "Get yourself presentable," Caleb had barked that morning, throwing a faded calico dress at her. "And for once in your miserable life, try not to look like such a damn burden." Elena had pressed the fabric to her chest, her throat tight. At 23, she'd long since stopped crying at her father's words. The tears had dried up somewhere around her 14th birthday, the same year her mother died and left her alone with a man who saw her as nothing more than another mouth to feed, and a shameful one at that. She'd changed in the corner of the cramped soddy, her fingers trembling as she fastened the buttons. The dress had been her mother's once, back when Margaret Ward still had light in her eyes and hope in her voice. Now it hung loose in some places, strained in others. A constant reminder that Elena's body didn't fit the mold of what frontier men valued in their women. The mirror, a cracked piece of glass propped against the wall, showed her what she already knew. Round face, soft chin, wide hips and heavy arms that had carried water, scrubbed floors, and nursed her dying mother through 2 brutal winters. Her dark hair, thick and unruly, refused to stay pinned no matter how she tried. Her eyes, the same amber brown as prairie grass in autumn, held a weariness that made her look older than her years. "You done primping?" Caleb's voice was sharp with impatience. "Ain't nobody gonna pay extra just 'cause you braided your hair." Elena had followed him out into the August heat, her feet heavy in worn boots that had belonged to her mother. The trading post at Prescott Station was already crowded when they arrived. Ranchers, drifters, merchants, and opportunists drawn by the promise of cheap labor and cheaper goods. The air smelled of horse sweat, whiskey, and desperation. Caleb dragged her through the crowd like a farmer hauling livestock to market. Men looked her over with calculating eyes, weighing her worth in pounds of flour or yards of fence she could mend. Women whispered behind their hands, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt. "That's Caleb Ward's girl," someone muttered. "Heard he's finally getting rid of her." "About time. She's been eating him out of house and home for years. Too old now and too plain. Who'd want her?" Elena kept her eyes on the ground, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. Shame settled over her shoulders like a yoke, familiar and suffocating. This was her value then. This was what her life had come to. The auctioneer, a reed-thin man named Hoskins who ran the trading post, climbed onto a makeshift platform near the hitching posts. He'd been selling supplies all morning, barrels of salt pork, crates of ammunition, a pair of milk cows. Now he turned his attention to human transactions. "Next item," Hoskins announced, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Miss Elena Ward, age 23. Father's looking to place her in service. She can cook, clean, tend animals, knows her herbs and remedies. Her mama was a healer before she passed." Caleb shoved Elena forward, and she stumbled onto the platform, her face burning. The crowd pressed closer, men evaluating her the way they'd evaluate a plow horse. "She got all her teeth?" someone called out. "Can she bear children?" "She looks like she could bear a whole litter," another voice jeered, and laughter rolled through the gathering. Caleb's face darkened. "She's strong," he said loudly, trying to control the narrative. "Works hard. Doesn't complain, and she's got her mother's gift with medicine. Saved 3 children through the fever last winter." "Yeah, but how much does she eat?" The question came from a rancher Elena recognized, Malcolm Byers, A cruel man with a reputation for working his help half to death. She eats what she's given, Caleb snapped. No more, no less. Elena stood frozen, her vision blurring at the edges. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. But the auctioneer's voice droned on and men started calling out offers that made her stomach turn. $50 and a side of beef. $75 if she can actually cook. $100, but only if she comes with that quilt she's carrying. Elena's hand tightened on the bundle she'd brought, her mother's wedding quilt, the only thing of value she owned. Margaret had stitched it during her first winter in Wyoming, every square carefully chosen, every seam straight and true. Elena would sooner die than give it up. The quilt stays with her, Caleb said, surprising her. It ain't worth much anyway. The bidding stalled. Men lost interest, turning back to their whiskey and their conversations. Elena felt herself becoming invisible again, worthless even as merchandise. The auctioneer shifted his weight, ready to move on. Then the crowd parted. He moved like a shadow-given form, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in buckskin and worn leather that spoke of years in the high country. His hair hung past his shoulders, dark as a raven's wing, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. But it was his eyes that caught Elena's attention, pale gray, like winter ice, and utterly unreadable. The crowd fell silent as he approached the platform. Even Caleb took a step back. $200, the man said. His voice was rough from disuse, but it carried weight. Cash. Hoskins blinked. Did you say $200 for the woman and whatever she's carrying? The crowd erupted in whispers. $200 was more than most families saw in 6 months. It was enough to buy a good horse, a winter's worth of supplies, and still have money left over. Caleb's eyes gleamed with greed. Sold, he said, before Hoskins could even respond. She's yours. Elena's legs nearly gave out. She stared at the stranger, trying to make sense of what was happening. He didn't look cruel, but then neither had some of the worst men she'd known. The mountain man pulled a leather pouch from his belt and counted out gold coins into Hoskins' palm. The auctioneer bid each one, testing their authenticity, then nodded. The transaction was complete. Come on then, the stranger said quietly, extending a hand toward Elena. She hesitated, looking back at her father one last time. Caleb was already counting his money, a satisfied smirk on his weathered face. He didn't even glance her way. Something inside Elena's chest cracked clean through. Whatever fragile hope she'd held on to, that her father might change, might see her as something more than a burden, shattered like glass. She took the stranger's hand. His grip was firm, but not painful. He helped her down from the platform, and the crowd parted to let them through. Elena kept her head down, clutching her mother's quilt to her chest as they walked toward the edge of the settlement where a massive roan horse waited, saddled and packed for travel. What's your name? The man asked as he checked the saddle straps. Elena. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. I'm Jonah Reed. He glanced at her, those pale eyes studying her face. Can you ride? She nodded. She'd learned as a girl, back when her mother was still alive and there had been brief moments of joy in their hard-scrabble life. Good. He swung into the saddle with easy grace, then reached down. Give me your hand. Elena did, and he pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing. She settled awkwardly onto the horse's back, trying not to touch more of him than necessary. Hold on, Jonah said. To what? Me. Unless you want to fall off once we reach the high trails. Elena's face burned, but she wrapped her arms around his waist. Through the buckskin shirt, she could feel the solid muscle of his back, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He smelled of pine smoke, leather, and something wild she couldn't name. Jonah clicked his tongue, and the roan moved forward at a steady walk. They left Prescott Station behind, heading north toward the distant mountains that rose like blue shadows on the horizon. Elena watched the settlement disappear, along with everything she'd ever known. The soddy where her mother had died, the creek where she'd gathered water every morning for 23 years, the graves of neighbors who'd shown her brief kindness before moving on or dying off. Where are you taking me? She finally asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. My cabin. 3 days' ride north, up in the high country. What? She swallowed hard. What do you want from me? Jonah was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I need help. My place needs tending. I need someone who knows healing, who can work the land when I'm out trapping. That's all? He glanced back at her, and something in his expression softened, just barely. That's all. Elena wanted to believe him, but she'd learned long ago that men's words and men's actions rarely aligned, so she kept quiet, holding on as the horse carried them into the wilderness. They rode through the rest of that day and into the evening, stopping only twice to water the horse and stretch their legs. Jonah didn't speak much, but he was attentive, offering her water, asking if she needed to rest, adjusting their pace when the terrain grew rough. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, they made camp in a small clearing beside a stream. Jonah unsaddled the horse and hobbled it near the water, then set about building a fire with practiced efficiency. Elena stood awkwardly to the side, unsure what to do. In her father's house, she'd always known her role. Here, everything was uncertain. There's coffee in the saddlebag, Jonah said, nodding toward his gear. And some dried meat. Help yourself. She found the supplies and busied herself making coffee, grateful for a task. The familiar motion steadied her, measuring grounds, adding water from the canteen, setting the pot near the flames. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and offered one to Jonah. He took it with a nod of thanks. You know how to make a good cup. My mother taught me. The words came out before she could stop them. The healer? Yes. Elena wrapped her hands around her own cup, savoring the warmth. She knew plants, remedies, could bring down a fever, set a bone, ease a difficult birth. People came to her when they had nowhere else to turn. And she taught you? Everything she could, before she died. Jonah was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. That's a valuable skill, especially up in the mountains. Nearest doctor's a week's ride away, and he's drunk more often than not. Elena sipped her coffee, studying him in the firelight. He had a weathered face, lined by sun and wind, but he couldn't be much older than 35. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who'd spent years working hard and living rough. Why did you buy me? The question escaped before she could think better of it. Jonah looked up, meeting her eyes. I didn't buy you. You paid my father. I paid him to leave you alone. There's a difference. He set his cup down. I saw what was happening, saw how he treated you, how the crowd looked at you. I've got no use for men who sell their own blood like livestock. Elena's throat tightened. You don't even know me. No, but I know men like your father. Something dark flickered in Jonah's eyes. I know what it's like to be someone's burden, someone's shame. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. Elena wanted to ask more, but the walls around Jonah's expression told her the conversation was over. Get some sleep, he said, pulling a bedroll from his pack and tossing it to her. We've got a long ride ahead tomorrow. Elena spread the bedroll on the far side of the fire, wrapped herself in her mother's quilt, and lay down. The ground was hard, the night sounds unfamiliar. Owls hooting, coyotes yipping in the distance, the rustle of wind through pine branches. Across the fire, Jonah sat with his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. Elena watched him through her lashes, this stranger who'd changed everything with $200 and a handful of words. She didn't know if she should trust him, didn't know what waited for her in those distant mountains. But as exhaustion finally dragged her under, one thought surfaced clear and bright. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen her. Not out of obligation or pity, but because he'd seen her worth when no one else had. It was a strange, fragile thing, this spark of hope, but Elena held on to it as she drifted into sleep, her mother's quilt wrapped tight around her shoulders. The second day's ride took them higher into the mountains, following narrow trails that switched back through stands of pine and aspen. The air grew thinner, colder, scented with sage and wildflowers. Elena's legs ached from riding, her hands cramped from holding on to Jonah's waist, but she didn't complain. Around midday, they stopped beside a creek to rest the horse. Elena knelt at the water's edge, splashing her face and drinking deep. The water was so cold it made her teeth ache, but it tasted clean and sweet, nothing like the muddy creek back in Prescott Station. Beautiful, isn't it? Jonah's voice came from behind her. Elena looked up at the towering peaks, the endless expanse of forest stretching in every direction. I've never seen anything like it. This is just the foothills. Wait until we get higher. She turned to face him. Do you ever get lonely? Living up here by yourself? Jonah considered the question, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes, but I prefer loneliness to bad company. Is that why you left civilization? Part of it. He crouched beside the creek, refilling his canteen. I spent 10 years as an army scout after the war, saw things, did things I'm not proud of. When my contract ended, I came up here to forget. Did it work? No. He straightened, his jaw tight. But at least up here, I'm not making things worse. Elena recognized the weight in his voice. The same burden she'd carried for years. The belief that her very existence was a problem to be solved. What made you come down to Prescott Station? Needed supplies. Salt, ammunition, coffee. He met her eyes. Wasn't planning on bringing anyone back with me. Then why? I told you. I saw what was happening and I couldn't walk away. Jonah's voice was firm. I've walked away from too many things in my life, Elena. I wasn't about to walk away from that. The use of her name, simple, direct, without mockery or condescension, made something in her chest tighten. When was the last time someone had spoken her name with respect? They rode on through the afternoon, climbing higher still. The landscape changed around them, dense forest giving way to alpine meadows dotted with wildflowers. Elk grazed in the distance, their massive antlers silhouetted against the sky. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals with effortless grace. Elena found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the journey. The horse's steady gait, the whisper of wind through the trees, the solid warmth of Jonah's back against her arms. It all felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, the constant knot of anxiety in her stomach began to loosen. As evening approached, they crested a ridge and Jonah reined the horse to a stop. There, he said, pointing. Elena followed his gesture and caught her breath. Below them, nestled in a valley between two peaks, sat a log cabin. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and a small corral held 3 horses grazing peacefully. Behind the cabin, a stream tumbled down from the heights, its water sparkling in the fading light. The meadow surrounding the cabin was thick with grass, wildflowers nodding in the breeze. That's home, Jonah said quietly. Home. Elena tested the word in her mind, trying to imagine a place where she belonged. The cabin looked solid, well-built, sheltered from the worst of the mountain weather, but more than that, it looked like sanctuary. They descended into the valley as the sun touched the western peaks. By the time they reached the cabin, twilight had settled over the land, painting everything in shades of blue and purple. Jonah dismounted first, then helped Elena down. Her legs wobbled when her feet hit the ground, stiff from 2 days of riding. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow. Easy. You'll get your land legs back. Elena looked up at the cabin. Up close, she could see the careful craftsmanship. The logs fitted tight, the roof shingled with hand-split cedar, the windows covered with oiled parchment that glowed softly from the fire within. Someone's inside, she said, her heart suddenly racing. Just old Tom. He watches the place when I'm gone. Jonah opened the door and called out, Tom, I'm back! A grizzled man appeared in the doorway, his weathered face breaking into a gap-toothed grin. About damn time, Reed. I was starting to think you'd gotten yourself... He stopped, his eyes widening as he spotted Elena. Well, I'll be damned. Tom, this is Elena Ward. She'll be staying on to help manage the place. Tom looked from Jonah to Elena and back again, his expression skeptical but not unkind. That's so? That's so. Jonah's tone left no room for argument. Tom shrugged. Your business, Reed. I'll just collect my things and head out. Stay for supper, Jonah offered. Leave in the morning. Don't mind if I do. Tom stepped aside to let them enter. The cabin's interior was larger than Elena had expected. One main room with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. A smaller room off to the side appeared to be for storage. Everything was neat, organized, built to last. But what struck Elena most was the emptiness. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no personal touches beyond the necessary tools of survival. It was a place for existing, not living. "I'll show you where things are," Jonah said, setting down his pack. "Tom, there's venison in the root cellar. Elena, you feel up to cooking?" Elena nodded, grateful for something useful to do. As Tom fetched the meat and Jonah tended to the horses, she explored the cabin's supplies. Flour, cornmeal, salt, dried beans, coffee. Basic staples, but enough to work with. She found a cast iron skillet, cut the venison into strips, and set them to frying over the fire. In the root cellar, accessed by a trapdoor in the floor, she discovered potatoes, onions, and dried herbs. Not her mother's carefully tended garden, but close enough. As she cooked, muscle memory took over. The familiar motions calmed her racing thoughts. Chopping onions, seasoning meat, testing the heat of the pan. This, at least, she knew how to do. Tom and Jonah returned, bringing the smell of horses and fresh air. They settled at the table and Elena served the meal. Venison with fried potatoes and onions, coffee dark and strong. Tom took a bite and his eyebrows rose. "Girl can cook." "Told you," Jonah said. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the scrape of forks on tin plates. Elena picked at her food, too nervous to eat much, but both men cleaned their plates and reached for seconds. When the meal was done, Tom pushed back from the table with a satisfied grunt. "Reed, I'll say this. You might be onto something here." Jonah didn't respond, but Elena caught the slight curve of his mouth that might have been a smile. Later, after Tom had climbed into the loft and his snores rattled the rafters, Jonah showed Elena the storage room. "You can sleep here. I'll rig a proper bed tomorrow, but for tonight, this will have to do." The room was small but dry, with space enough for a narrow cot and her few belongings. Elena spread her mother's quilt over the rough wooden floor, creating a makeshift pallet. "Thank you," she said, looking up at Jonah. "For everything." He nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, I'll show you around the valley. There's work to be done, but nothing that can't wait a day or two." Elena watched him leave, pulling the door closed behind him. Alone in the darkness, she wrapped herself in her mother's quilt and let out a long, shaky breath. 3 days ago, she'd been standing on an auction block, sold like livestock. Now she was in a mountain cabin, miles from anywhere, with a man she barely knew and a future completely uncertain. But as she closed her eyes, Elena realized something had changed. The crushing weight of shame that had defined her for so long felt lighter. Not gone. Maybe it would never be truly gone, but diminished. Jonah had paid for her freedom, not her servitude. He'd offered her work, not degradation. He'd given her a place to sleep, food to eat, and most unexpectedly, dignity. It was more than she'd ever dared to hope for, and for tonight, it was enough. Morning came soft and golden through the oiled parchment windows. Elena woke to the sound of voices, Tom's gravelly drawl and Jonah's quieter responses filtering through the thin door. She sat up, her body stiff from sleeping on the floor, and took stock of her surroundings in the daylight. The storage room was barely 8 feet square, its walls lined with shelves holding dried goods, tools, and supplies. A small window near the ceiling let in a shaft of sunlight that illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. It wasn't much, but it was hers, the first space she'd ever had to herself. She folded her mother's quilt carefully, running her fingers over the familiar patterns. Each square told a story. Blue calico from Margaret's wedding dress, red flannel from a shirt she'd made for Caleb before bitterness consumed him, green cotton from Elena's baby blanket. The stitches were small and precise, her mother's hands creating beauty even as frontier life tried to grind her down. Elena pressed the quilt to her face, breathing in the faint scent of sage and wood smoke. "I made it, Mama," she whispered. "I'm somewhere new, somewhere that might be better." A knock on the door startled her. "Elena?" Jonah's voice came through the wood. "Breakfast is ready when you are. I'll be right there." She smoothed her dress, finger-combed her unruly hair, and stepped out into the main room. Tom was already at the table, a plate of fried eggs and cornbread in front of him. Jonah stood by the fireplace, coffee pot in hand. "Sleep all right?" he asked, pouring her a cup. "Well enough, thank you." Tom snorted. "Girl's too polite, Reed. Probably spent the night on a floor harder than frozen ground. He looked at Elena. Don't let this mountain hermit's hospitality fool you. Man's got the social graces of a porcupine. I get by, Jonah said mildly, handing Elena her coffee. She took it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin cup. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it chased away the last cobwebs of sleep. Jonah slid a plate across the table, eggs fried in bacon grease, thick slices of cornbread, and wild blackberry jam. Elena stared at the food. It was more than she'd typically eaten for breakfast in her father's house, where every scrap was measured and rationed, where her portions were always smallest because she was already too big anyway. Something wrong? Jonah asked. No, I just... She stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. Thank you. They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks and Tom's occasional commentary about the weather, the state of the horses, and the elk herd he'd spotted near the North Ridge. Elena ate slowly, savoring every bite, trying not to think about how temporary this might be. When the meal was finished, Tom gathered his gear and headed for the door. Reed, you keep yourself out of trouble. And you, he turned to Elena, don't let this ornery bastard work you to death. He forgets sometimes that other people need rest. I'll manage, Elena said. Tom tipped his hat and disappeared outside. They heard him whistling as he saddled his horse, then the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Jonah cleared the table, his movements efficient and practiced. Come on, he said. I'll show you around. Outside, the valley revealed itself in full daylight, and Elena caught her breath. The cabin sat in a natural bowl ringed by towering peaks still capped with snow despite the late summer heat. The meadow stretched out in all directions, thick with wildflowers, purple lupine, yellow arrowleaf, delicate white columbine. The stream that fed the valley tumbled down from the heights in a series of small waterfalls, its sound a constant, gentle music. It's beautiful, Elena said, the words inadequate for what she felt. It's isolated, Jonah replied, but there was pride in his voice. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles east, the Harpers. Good people, keep to themselves mostly. Another family about 7 miles south, the Callahans. They've got 3 kids, youngest is 5. Gets the croup every winter. Elena filed the information away, her healer's mind already cataloging what she'd need. I should prepare some remedies, horehound and honey for coughs, willow bark for fever. The herbs grow wild all through these mountains, Jonah said. I'll show you the best patches, but first the practical things. He led her through the property with the thoroughness of a man who understood that survival in the high country required knowledge. The root cellar, dug deep into the hillside and lined with stone, stayed cool even in summer. The smokehouse, where venison and elk hung curing in fragrant cedar smoke. The corral, where 3 horses, the roan she'd ridden, and 2 sturdy mountain ponies grazed contentedly. That's Smoke, Jonah said, pointing to the roan. The brown mare is Molly, and the gray is Ash. All 3 are steady on mountain trails. You'll need to learn to handle them on your own. I can ride, Elena said. My mother taught me when I was young. Good, because I'll be gone sometimes, checking trap lines, hunting, trading in the lower valleys. You'll need to manage things here alone. The word should have frightened her, but instead Elena felt a strange thrill. Alone meant independent. Alone meant trusted. Alone meant free. They walked to the stream, and Jonah showed her where the water ran clearest, where fish pooled in the deeper eddies, where the best watercress grew in the shallows. He pointed out the garden plot, overgrown now with weeds, neglected. I'm no farmer, he admitted. Can keep myself fed, but I never had the patience for growing things. Elena knelt beside the plot, running her fingers through the soil. Rich and dark, fed by mountain runoff and decades of decomposing leaves. This could be something, she said quietly, with the right care. Then it's yours to tend. She looked up at him, shading her eyes against the sun. Why are you doing this? Giving me work? A place to stay? Freedom to manage things? You don't know me. I could be lazy, or a thief, or... I saw you make coffee from memory while your world was falling apart, Jonah interrupted. Saw you cook a decent meal in a strange kitchen after 2 days of hard riding. Saw you keep your dignity when every person at that trading post was treating you like livestock. He crouched down beside her, his pale eyes serious. I know enough. Elena's throat tightened. What if I'm not what you think I am? Then we'll figure it out. He stood, offering her his hand. But I don't think I'm wrong. She let him pull her to her feet, and they continued the tour. He showed her the shed where tools were kept, the lean-to that sheltered firewood through the winter, the trail that led to a natural spring a quarter-mile up the mountain where the water tasted of minerals and stone. By midday, Elena's head was spinning with information. She'd filled her mental catalog with landmarks, plants, dangers to avoid, the steep ravine on the western edge of the property, the rocky outcrop where mountain lions sometimes sunned themselves, the patch of nightshade growing near the tree line. "That's enough for today," Jonah said, reading her exhaustion. "You need rest, and I need to check the trap lines before dark." Back at the cabin, he saddled Smoke while Elena watched from the doorway. He moved with the kind of easy competence that came from years of practice, every motion deliberate and sure. "There's bread and cheese for lunch," he said, swinging into the saddle. "I'll be back before supper. If anything happens, anything at all, fire 3 shots from the rifle. I'll hear it and come back." "What kind of things might happen?" "Bears, mostly. They usually avoid the cabin, but occasionally one gets curious. There's also been talk of drifters in the lower valleys, men who'd rather steal than work." His expression darkened. "You see anyone you don't know, you get inside, bar the door, and fire those 3 shots. Understand?" Elena nodded, her earlier sense of peace evaporating. The rifle hung above the door, loaded and ready. She'd shot one before. Her mother had insisted she learn, but the thought of actually needing to use it made her stomach clench. "I'll be fine," she said, with more confidence than she felt. Jonah studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you will." He rode off toward the north ridge, and Elena watched until he disappeared into the tree line. Then she turned back to the cabin, suddenly aware of how alone she was. The silence pressed in, not threatening, but absolute. No voices, no wagon wheels, no sounds of human activity, just wind through the pines, the distant cry of a hawk, and the steady murmur of the stream. Elena took a deep breath and got to work. She started with the cabin itself, sweeping floors that hadn't seen a broom in who knew how long. Dust billowed up in clouds, making her sneeze, but she persisted. She scrubbed the table, organized the shelves, and washed every dish and pot she could find. The physical labor felt good, purposeful. In the storage room, she unpacked her few belongings, 2 spare dresses, her mother's sewing kit, a small Bible with Margaret's name written inside the cover in careful script and tucked deep within the quilt's folds, something she'd almost forgotten. Elena's fingers found the stiff parchment sewn into the lining, hidden so well she'd never noticed it before. She worked the stitches loose carefully, her heart pounding, and pulled out a folded document, yellowed with age. The paper crackled as she opened it. Legal language, formal and dense, but certain words jumped out. Water rights, territorial deed, Margaret Ann Prescott, her mother's maiden name. Elena's hands trembled as she read. It was a deed, signed and sealed, granting her mother, and by extension, her heirs, control of the water rights for Prescott Valley, the very valley where the trading post sat. The document was dated 1851, before Wyoming was even a proper territory, back when Margaret's father had been one of the first settlers. "Mama," Elena whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" But she knew why. Caleb would have taken it, sold it, used it for whiskey money. Margaret had hidden it, protected it, sewn it into the quilt that would pass to her daughter. A final gift. A final act of love. Elena refolded the deed with shaking hands and tucked it into the very bottom of her mother's sewing kit, beneath the spools of thread and packets of needles. This wasn't the time to think about what it meant, what power it represented. For now, it was enough to know it existed. She finished cleaning as the afternoon light slanted golden through the windows. The cabin looked different now, still simple, still rough, but cared for. She'd found a crate in the shed and upended it beside the fireplace to create a small side table. A handful of wildflowers in a tin cup added color. Small changes, but they mattered. Elena was outside beating dust from a blanket when she heard horses approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she dropped the blanket, running for the cabin and the rifle above the door. But before she could reach it, a woman's voice called out, "Hello, the house! We're friendly!" Elena paused in the doorway, her pulse racing. 2 horses emerged from the tree line, a sturdy bay and a paint pony. The bay carried a woman about Elena's age, blonde and sun-weathered, with a baby strapped to her chest. The pony carried 2 children, a boy of maybe 7 and a girl who couldn't be more than 5. The woman reined in near the porch, her expression cautious but curious. "You must be Elena. Tom stopped by our place this morning, said Jonah had brought someone back from Prescott Station." "I'm Sarah Harper," the woman continued when Elena didn't respond. "This is my son William, my daughter Lucy, and the baby is Thomas. We're your nearest neighbors." Elena found her voice. "Mrs. Harper, I'm Elena Ward. Call me Sarah, please." The woman dismounted with practiced ease despite the baby and tied her horse to the porch rail. "William, Lucy, stay on the pony and don't touch anything." The children nodded solemnly, their eyes wide as they took in Elena. Sarah approached the porch, her expression warming. "I hope we're not intruding. I just wanted to welcome you to the valley and let you know if you need anything at all. We're just 5 miles east over the ridge." "That's very kind," Elena said, her throat tight. When was the last time another woman had spoken to her with such genuine friendliness? "I also brought you something." Sarah reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Fresh bread and some of my strawberry preserves. Figured you might appreciate a few extras while you're settling in." Elena took the bundle, the warmth of the bread seeping through the fabric. "Thank you. I'm not used to such kindness." Something in Sarah's expression shifted, a flash of understanding. "Jonah's a good man, Elena. Rough around the edges, but decent to his core. And this valley, we look after each other up here. Has to be that way when winter comes." "I'm beginning to understand that." Sarah glanced at the cabin, taking in the beaten blanket, the swept porch, the flowers in the window. "You've already made a difference here. Place looks better than it has in years. I've just been cleaning." "That's more than Jonah would do on his own." Sarah shifted the baby to her other hip. "Listen, I know Tom mentioned my Lucy gets the croup. If you truly know healing, like he said, I'd be grateful for any advice. Last winter nearly killed her." Elena's healer instincts kicked in immediately. "I'll prepare some remedies. Horehound and honey for the cough, steam treatments with pine needles to open the lungs, and I'll show you how to make a mustard plaster for when it gets bad." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "Bless you. The nearest doctor is a week away, and by the time you could get there and back—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "I'll come by in a few days," Elena promised, "once I've gathered the herbs I need." "That would be wonderful." Sarah untied her horse and swung back into the saddle. "William, Lucy, say goodbye to Miss Elena." "Goodbye, Miss Elena," they chorused. Elena watched them ride away, the woman and 3 children disappearing into the forest like something from a dream. She stood on the porch long after they'd gone, Sarah's words echoing in her mind. "We look after each other up here." For the first time in her life, Elena felt the edges of belonging. She went back inside and unwrapped Sarah's gift. The bread was still warm, crusty, and golden, and the preserves smelled of summer berries and sugar. Elena cut a thick slice, spread it with preserves, and took a bite. It tasted like hope. When Jonah returned at dusk, 3 rabbits slung over his saddle, he found the cabin transformed. Clean floors, organized shelves, flowers on the table, the smell of fresh bread mixed with the scent of pine smoke and coffee. Elena was at the stove, stirring something in a pot. She looked up when he entered, and he noticed the change in her immediately, shoulders less hunched, eyes less haunted. "Sarah Harper came by," she said. Jonah nodded, unsurprised. "News travels fast up here. What did you think of her?" "She was kind." Elena ladled stew into bowls. She'd used the last of the venison, potatoes, and wild onions to make something hearty. She brought bread and preserves. "Sarah's good people. Her husband David is too, though he's quieter. They've been up here about 6 years, making a go of it." They ate dinner, and Elena told him about the visit, about Sarah's concerns for Lucy, about her promise to prepare remedies. Jonah listened, his expression thoughtful. "You'll do well here," he said finally. "The valley needs a healer." "What does the valley need you for?" The question came out before Elena could stop it. Too forward, too personal. But Jonah didn't seem offended. "Meat, mostly. I keep the Harpers and Callahans supplied with venison and elk. Trade furs down in the lower settlements for goods we can't make ourselves." He paused. And I keep an eye out for trouble. What kind of trouble? Drifters looking to steal livestock. Occasionally worse. His jaw tightened. There's men in these mountains who think isolation means they can do as they please. They're wrong. Elena heard the steel in his voice and understood. Jonah Reed might prefer solitude, but he wasn't indifferent to injustice. He'd proven that when he bought her freedom. After dinner, Jonah built a simple bed frame in the storage room. Rough lumber and rope, but solid. Elena stuffed a mattress tick with dried grass and pine needles, and for the first time in 3 days, she had a real bed to sleep in. That night, lying in the darkness with her mother's quilt pulled up to her chin, Elena listened to the sounds of the cabin settling. Jonah's quiet movements in the main room as he banked the fire and prepared for sleep. The creak of the ladder as he climbed to the loft. The whisper of wind through the eaves. She thought about the deed hidden in her sewing kit, about the power it represented, power her father would have killed for, power that could change everything. But she also thought about Sarah Harper's kindness, about Jonah's steady presence, about this valley that seemed to operate on principles of mutual support rather than exploitation. Maybe the deed didn't matter here. Maybe what mattered was that she'd finally found a place where her worth wasn't measured in pounds or beauty or obedience. A place where she could simply be Elena, and that might be enough. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Jonah would leave at dawn to check trap lines or hunt, and Elena would tend to the cabin, the garden, and increasingly to her growing knowledge of the valley's medicinal plants. She discovered wild chamomile growing near the stream, yarrow in the high meadows, and stands of willow whose bark she could harvest for fever remedies. She hung bundles of herbs from the rafters to dry, filling the cabin with the scent of sage, mint, and lavender. One morning, a week after Sarah's first visit, Elena was gathering coltsfoot near the North Ridge when she heard voices. She froze, Jonah's warnings about drifters echoing in her mind. But these voices were young, high-pitched. She peered through the trees and saw 2 children, Sarah's son William and daughter Lucy, crouched beside the stream with fishing poles. Elena approached quietly. "Any luck?" William jumped, nearly dropping his pole, but Lucy just grinned. "We caught 3 already. Mama said we could keep them for supper if we cleaned them ourselves." "That's a good skill to learn." Elena settled on a rock nearby, watching them work. William was focused and methodical, but Lucy kept getting distracted by dragonflies skimming the water's surface. "Miss Elena," Lucy said suddenly, "is it true you can make medicine from plants?" "I can. My mother taught me." "Could you teach me?" Elena blinked, surprised. "You want to learn healing?" "Mama says it's important. Says we need more healers in the valley, especially for when the snow comes and we can't get to town." William spoke up without taking his eyes off his fishing line. "Last winter, Lucy almost died from the croup. Mama was scared. I was scared too." Lucy's face grew solemn. "I don't want Mama to be scared again." Something in Elena's chest cracked open. This child, barely 5 years old, wanted to learn healing not for herself but to protect her mother from fear. "I'll teach you," Elena said quietly. "Both of you if you want. We'll start with the simple things. Which plants are safe to eat? Which ones can help with common ailments?" Lucy's face lit up like sunrise. "Really?" "Really. But you'll have to listen carefully and remember what I teach you. Healing isn't just about knowing plants. It's about paying attention." "We can pay attention," William said seriously. "Can't we, Lucy?" "The best attention ever," Lucy promised. They stayed by the stream for another hour, and Elena taught them their first lesson: how to identify mint by its square stem and distinctive smell, how to make a simple tea that could ease upset stomachs. When the children finally headed home, their string of fish in hand, Elena walked back to the cabin with a strange lightness in her step. Teaching them had awakened something she'd forgotten, that knowledge could be passed on, that her mother's wisdom didn't have to die with Margaret. That evening, she told Jonah about the encounter. He listened, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're going to end up with every child in the valley following you around," he said. "Would that be so terrible?" "No." He met her eyes. "I think it would be good." 2 weeks into her stay, Elena woke to find Jonah already gone and a note on the table. "Heading to Lower Valley for supplies. Back in 3 days. Rifles loaded. You know what to do. 3 days alone. Elena's first response was fear. What if something happened? What if she needed help? But then she looked around the cabin, at the herbs hanging from the rafters, at the garden she'd weeded and watered back to life, at the clean floors and stocked shelves. She'd done all this. She'd managed. She could manage 3 more days. The first day passed quietly. Elena worked in the garden, harvested herbs, and made a fresh batch of cough syrup for Sarah to pick up. She practiced shooting the rifle, getting used to its weight and kick, until she could hit a target at 50 paces more often than not. The second day, David Harper stopped by, a quiet, sturdy man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He'd brought fresh milk and eggs in trade for the cough syrup Elena had prepared. "Sarah says you're a godsend," he told her, his voice gruff with emotion. "Says Lucy's already breathing easier with those steam treatments you recommended. I'm glad I could help. We all are." David shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable with sentiment. "Listen, if you ever need anything, firewood, help with heavy work, whatever, you just send word. We take care of our own up here." Our own. The words wrapped around Elena like a warm blanket. The third day dawned gray and cold, with clouds massing over the peaks. Elena spent the morning preparing for the storm she could feel coming, securing the shutters, bringing in extra firewood, checking that the animals had shelter. She was hauling the last armload of wood when she heard horses. Multiple horses moving fast. Elena's heart kicked into overdrive. She dropped the wood and ran for the cabin, grabbing the rifle just as 3 riders burst into the clearing. The lead rider was a stranger, tall and lean, with cruel eyes and a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest that looked about as legitimate as a $3 bill. The 2 men behind him were cut from the same cloth, hard-faced, dangerous. "Well now," the lead rider said, swinging down from his horse. "Ain't you a pretty sight? Jonah Reed finally got himself a woman." Elena raised the rifle, her hands steady despite her pounding heart. "State your business or leave?" The man laughed. "Got some fire in you. I like that." He took a step closer. "Name's Pike. I'm looking for Reed. Where is he?" "Not here." "When's he coming back?" "I don't know." Elena kept the rifle trained on his chest. "You can leave a message or you can leave, but you're not coming any closer." Pike's expression hardened. "You threatening a lawman, girl?" "You're no lawman, and I'm warning you, not threatening. There's a difference." One of the men behind Pike shifted in his saddle, his hand moving toward his gun. Elena swung the rifle toward him. "Don't!" "Easy now," Pike said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We're just having a friendly conversation." "This conversation is over. Get off this property." Pike studied her for a long moment, his eyes calculating. Then he smiled, a cold reptilian expression that made Elena's skin crawl. "Tell Reed that Pike was here. Tell him I need to talk to him about a business proposition. And tell him," he paused, "tell him I don't take kindly to being refused." He swung back into his saddle and reined his horse around. The 3 riders disappeared into the trees, but Elena didn't lower the rifle until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Only then did she start shaking. She stumbled inside, barred the door, and sank into a chair. Her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the rifle. She'd done it, faced down 3 armed men and sent them away. But the cost was hitting her now, adrenaline draining away and leaving her weak. Elena sat there until her breathing steadied, until she could think clearly again. Then she went to the window and watched the tree line, the rifle across her lap, waiting for either the men to return or Jonah to come home. The storm broke at sunset, rain lashing the cabin, thunder rolling through the valley like artillery fire. Elena lit a lantern and kept watch through the long night, dozing fitfully in the chair by the window. Jonah returned the next morning, riding through the last of the rain with his pack horse loaded with supplies. Elena met him at the door, and he took one look at her face and went still. "What happened?" She told him everything: Pike, the fake badge, the threat. Jonah's expression grew darker with every word. "You did good," he said when she finished. "You did exactly right." "Who is he?" Jonah's jaw clenched. "Trouble. The kind I thought I'd left behind." He unloaded his supplies with quick, angry movements. Pike runs a gang that operates out of the lower valleys. They prey on isolated homesteads, steal livestock, worse. I had a run-in with them last year, drove them off Harperland when they tried to rustle David's cattle. And now he wants revenge? More likely he wants to try again. Thinks maybe I'll be more cooperative if he threatens you. Jonah's eyes were cold as winter ice. He's wrong. Over the next few days, Jonah taught Elena more than just how to shoot straight. He taught her how to read the forest, how to spot signs of intrusion, how to set up simple alarms using string and bells. He showed her 3 different escape routes from the cabin and made her practice them until she could navigate them blindfolded. "I'm not trying to scare you," he said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set. "But I need you to be prepared." "I understand." Elena paused. "Jonah, why did you really come down to Prescott Station? Was it just for supplies?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I heard there was a man trying to sell his daughter. Heard it was Caleb Ward, and I remembered that name." "You knew my father?" "Knew of him. He served in the same regiment as me during the war, though in a different company. He had a reputation, not a good one." Jonah's voice was heavy. "When I heard what he was doing, I had to try to stop it." "You saved me. You saved yourself." He turned to face her. "I just gave you the opportunity." Elena looked out at the valley, at the mountains turning purple in the fading light. "I want to stay here. I want this to be home." "It already is," Jonah said simply. And Elena realized he was right. Somewhere in the past weeks, this remote cabin in Wild Valley had become more of a home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Not because of the place itself, but because of what it represented: freedom, dignity, purpose. She belonged here. Now she just had to figure out how to protect it. The protection Elena thought she needed came from an unexpected source 3 weeks later, though not in the way she'd imagined. She was teaching William and Lucy about yarrow, how to identify its feathery leaves, how to use it to stop bleeding, when Sarah arrived with news that drained the color from her face. "Caleb Ward's in the lower valley," Sarah said without preamble. "Showed up 2 days ago asking questions about his daughter." Elena's hands stilled on the plant she'd been holding. "How do you know?" "David heard it from the Callahans, who heard it from a trapper passing through. Your father's saying you were stolen from him, saying Jonah Reed kidnapped you and he wants you back." The world tilted sideways. Elena gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "That's a lie. Jonah paid him. I know that. We all know that. But your father's telling a different story, and he's got men listening." Sarah's expression was grim. "Men who might see profit in helping him." William looked up from his plant samples, his young face troubled. "Miss Elena, you're not leaving, are you?" "No," Elena said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "I'm not leaving." But even as she spoke the words, fear coiled in her stomach. Caleb Ward was a lot of things: cruel, greedy, bitter, but he wasn't stupid. If he'd come this far into the mountains, he had a plan. That evening, when Jonah returned from checking the northern trap lines, Elena met him at the door. She'd spent the afternoon pacing, her mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. "My father's here," she said, "in the valley." Jonah's expression didn't change, but his hand moved to the knife at his belt in an unconscious gesture. "Sarah told you?" "Yes. He's claiming you kidnapped me." "Let him claim what he wants. You're not going anywhere." Jonah stepped past her into the cabin, his movements tight with controlled anger. "The question is why he bothered to come at all. $200 is more money than Caleb Ward's seen in years. He should be drunk in some saloon, not riding into mountain country." Elena thought about the deed hidden in her sewing kit, the water rights to Prescott Valley, the power her father would kill for if he knew it existed. "There's something I need to show you," she said quietly. She retrieved the document and spread it on the table. Jonah read it in silence, his finger tracing the faded script, his expression growing darker with each line. "Your mother held the water rights to the entire valley where the trading post sits," he said finally, "which means you hold them now." "I didn't know. I found it sewn into my mother's quilt after I got here." Elena's voice shook. "Do you think my father knows?" If he does, it explains a lot. Jonah refolded the deed carefully. Water rights in that valley control everything. Who can ranch, who can farm, where the town can expand. Men have killed for less. What do I do? Jonah met her eyes. You keep this safe. You don't tell anyone else it exists, and you let me handle your father. I won't let you fight my battles. This isn't just your battle anymore. His voice was gentle but firm. Pike's gang, your father's showing up, they're connected somehow. I can feel it. And if they're working together, they're after more than just you. Elena wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in his words. Still, the thought of hiding while others faced danger on her behalf made her sick. I'm not helpless, Jonah. I proved that when Pike came. I know, but there's a difference between defending yourself and walking into a trap. He touched her shoulder briefly, a rare gesture of comfort. Trust me on this. She nodded, though everything in her rebelled against the passivity. What's your plan? First, I'm going to talk to the Harpers and the Callahans. We need to know exactly what your father's been saying and who's been listening. Then, he paused. Then we wait. Make him come to us on ground we control. The waiting was worse than any action would have been. Elena threw herself into work, harvesting the last of the summer herbs, preserving vegetables from the garden, preparing medicines for the coming winter. But every sound made her jump. Every shadow at the edge of the clearing made her reach for the rifle. Jonah rode out each day to meet with their neighbors, building a network of information and trust. He came back with stories that made Elena's blood run cold. Caleb had been to the Callahan homestead, demanding to know if they'd seen his daughter. When Mary Callahan said no, he'd called her a liar and threatened to bring the law down on anyone harboring stolen property. John Callahan had run him off with a shotgun, but the damage was done. Seeds of doubt planted in soil already thin with frontier suspicion. He's trying to isolate you, Jonah explained one night over supper. Make people believe his version of events, so when he makes his move, no one will interfere. And is it working? Not with the people who matter. The Harpers and Callahans know the truth, so do the Mitchells and the Bensons further south. But there's others, newer settlers, drifters, men who might see an opportunity. Elena pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. This is because of me. Because I exist. This is because your father is a greedy bastard who sees you as property. Jonah's voice was hard. Don't you dare take responsibility for his choices. She looked up, startled by the intensity in his eyes. You barely know me. Why do you care so much? Because I know what it's like to be treated as less than human. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I spent 10 years following orders that made me sick, doing things I can never take back, all because I believed I had no choice. When I finally found the courage to walk away, I swore I'd never stand by and watch someone else be trapped the same way. Elena's throat tightened. What did they make you do? Things I won't speak of. Jonah moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. But I'll tell you this, every man has a choice about what kind of person he wants to be. Your father made his choice long ago. I made mine when I bought your freedom. Now you get to make yours. I choose to stay. I choose to fight. Then we fight together. The next morning brought a cold rain that turned the valley gray and somber. Elena was grinding herbs when she heard voices outside, multiple voices, some raised in anger. She grabbed the rifle and went to the door, her heart hammering. Through the rain, she could see 6 riders approaching the cabin. Jonah was already outside, his own rifle in hand, positioned between the riders and the porch. The lead rider was Caleb Ward. He looked worse than Elena remembered. Thinner, meaner, his eyes bloodshot and wild. The men with him were a rough crew, drifters and opportunists drawn by the promise of easy money. That's far enough, Jonah called out when they were still 20 yards away. Caleb reined in his horse, his gaze sliding past Jonah to fix on Elena in the doorway. There she is. There's my daughter, stolen from me by this mountain trash. You sold her, Jonah said flatly. I paid you $200 in front of witnesses. You took advantage of a desperate father. Caleb's voice rose, theatrical in its false grief. I was out of my mind with worry about the harvest, and you swooped in like a vulture, offering money for my only child. One of the riders shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should... Shut up, Caleb snapped. Then to Jonah, I want my daughter back, right now, or I'll go to the territorial governor, report a kidnapping, have every marshal in Wyoming hunting you down. Elena stepped forward, her rifle raised. I'm not going anywhere with you. You don't get a say, girl. You're my daughter, my responsibility. The law's on my side. The law says a woman can choose her own path once she's of age, Jonah said. Elena's 23, old enough to make her own decisions. She's simple-minded, Caleb said quickly. Easily influenced, can't be trusted to know what's good for her. Rage flooded through Elena, hot and bright. For 23 years, she'd swallowed her father's insults, accepted his casual cruelty as if it were deserved. But standing here on this mountain, in front of this cabin she'd cleaned and tended and made into something like a home, she found she had no more room for swallowing. I am not simple-minded, she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. I am not your property, and I am not going back to that Saudi to be your slave and your shame. Caleb's face twisted with fury. You ungrateful? After everything I did for you, keeping you fed, keeping a roof over your head? You sold me at a trading post like I was a sack of flour. Elena's voice broke, but she didn't stop. You spent my whole life telling me I was worthless, that I was too much trouble, that I ate too much and worked too little. Well, I'm done believing you. Elena. Jonah's voice held a warning, but she ignored it. You want to know what I've done in the 6 weeks I've been here? I've healed sick children. I've taught them about medicine. I've tended a garden and kept a home and proven I'm worth something to people who actually see me. So no, Father, I won't be going back with you. Not today, not ever. Caleb's hand moved to the pistol at his hip, and the world seemed to slow down. Jonah's rifle came up in one smooth motion, aimed at Caleb's chest. Don't, Jonah said quietly. I'd hate to shoot a man in front of his daughter, but I will if you force my hand. One of the riders behind Caleb spoke up, a younger man with nervous eyes. Ward, you said this would be simple. You said she'd come willingly once she saw you. She will, Caleb insisted, though his hand had moved away from his gun. She's just confused. This man's poisoned her mind against her own father. Or maybe, a new voice called out, she's finally free of you. Everyone turned. David Harper rode into the clearing, followed by John Callahan and 3 other men Elena recognized from the valley. They positioned their horses in a loose semicircle, cutting off Caleb's escape route. You boys should head on back down to the lower valleys, David said, his voice calm but his rifle very present. This doesn't concern you. The riders with Caleb exchanged glances. They'd signed on for easy money, not a standoff with armed settlers who knew the terrain and had every reason to protect their own. Ward didn't tell us the whole story, one of them said, already turning his horse. We want no part of this. You cowards, Caleb shouted as his hired help rode away. I'll pay double, triple, but they were gone, disappearing into the rain and mist like ghosts. Caleb sat alone on his horse, surrounded by men with rifles, facing a daughter who'd finally found her voice. For the first time in Elena's memory, he looked uncertain. You've got no claim here, Ward, John Callahan said. Legal or otherwise, best thing you can do is ride on out before this gets ugly. She's my daughter, Caleb said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. My blood. Then you should have treated her like she mattered, Sarah Harper's voice came from behind Elena. The woman had approached on foot, silent in the rain, and now stood beside Elena on the porch. But you didn't. You treated her like garbage, and now you want her back because you finally realized she has value. Elena's hand trembled on the rifle. How did Sarah know? Had she guessed about the deed? But Sarah wasn't finished. Word is you've been drinking with Pike and his gang, making deals, planning something that requires money you don't have. She paused. Or maybe money you think Elena has. Caleb's face went pale, and Elena knew. He'd figured out about the water rights somehow. Maybe he'd found old papers in the Saudi after she left. Maybe he'd simply put pieces together. Either way, he knew, and he'd come to claim what he thought was his. Those water rights belong to my wife, Caleb said desperately, which means they're mine by marriage law. Your wife is dead, Jonah said, which means they pass to her heir, to Elena. I'm her father. I have a right. You have nothing. Elena's voice was steady now, all fear burned away by righteous anger. Mother hid that deed from you for a reason. She knew what you'd do with it, sell it to the highest bidder, trade away the valley's future for whiskey money. Well, I won't let that happen. You can't stop me. I'll go to the territorial courts. Go ahead, Jonah interrupted. We'll be ready. We've got witnesses who'll testify you sold Elena of your own free will. We've got a legal document showing the water rights belong to Margaret Prescott's heir. And we've got the support of every settler in this valley who's tired of men like you trying to profit off other people's suffering. Caleb looked around at the circle of armed men, at his daughter standing straight and defiant, at the future he'd gambled away slipping through his fingers like water. This isn't over, he said, but there was no conviction in it. Yes, Elena said quietly. It is. He stared at her for a long moment, and Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of the man he might have been if bitterness hadn't consumed him. But then it was gone, replaced by the familiar sneer. You'll regret this, he said. You'll see how hard the world is for women alone, and you'll wish you'd come back when I gave you the chance. I'm not alone, Elena said, looking around at the people who'd ridden through the rain to stand with her. That's something you'll never understand. Caleb jerked his horse around and rode away, his back rigid with wounded pride. They watched until he disappeared into the trees, until even the sound of hoofbeats had faded to nothing. David Harper was the first to lower his rifle. That man's going to be trouble. Not if we handle this right, Jonah said. He turned to Elena. You said you won't let the water rights be sold. What will you do with them? Elena hadn't thought that far ahead. She'd been so focused on keeping the deed away from her father that she hadn't considered what possessing it actually meant. I need to think, she said slowly, but whatever I decide, it should benefit everyone in the valley, not just me. Sarah smiled. That's exactly the right answer. The men rode away one by one, returning to their own homesteads and families. Sarah lingered helping Elena make coffee while Jonah saw to the horses. How did you know? Elena asked as they worked. About my father and Pike? David heard things. Pieced them together. Sarah poured coffee into tin cups. Pike's been trying to gain control of the lower valleys for years. If he could get those water rights, he'd have leverage over every rancher and farmer in the region. Your father probably promised to deliver the deed in exchange for a cut of Pike's profits. But Pike doesn't have the deed, I do. Which makes you a problem he'll need to solve. Sarah's expression was serious. You stood up to your father today, and that took courage. But Pike's a different kind of enemy. He won't give up just because you said no. Elena knew she was right. The confrontation with Caleb had been a battle, but the war was far from over. That night, after Sarah had gone, and the cabin was quiet except for the rain drumming on the roof, Elena sat by the fire with the deed spread across her lap. Jonah sat across from her, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. I could give it to the valley, Elena said finally. Create some kind of, community trust, so no one person controls the water. That's generous. Maybe too generous. What do you mean? Jonah set down the rifle and met her eyes. Those rights are valuable, Elena. They could make you wealthy, give you security for life. You could leave here, go anywhere, be anyone. I don't want to leave here. The words came without hesitation. This is the first place I've ever felt like I belong. Even knowing the danger? Knowing Pike won't stop coming? Even then. Elena folded the deed carefully. My mother survived 20 years in that Saudi with a man who despised her. She hid this deed, protected it, because she believed it mattered. I won't dishonor her sacrifice by using it for personal gain. Then what will you do? I'll share it. Create a charter that gives every settler fair access to water. Prevent anyone, Pike or my father or anyone else, from monopolizing a resource people need to survive. She looked up at Jonah. Will you help me? Of course. Something shifted in his expression, a warmth she hadn't seen before. You're remarkable, you know that? Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. I'm just trying to do what's right. That's what makes you remarkable. They sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling, the rain easing to a gentle patter. Elena felt the weight of the day settling into her bones. Exhaustion, but also pride. She'd faced her father and won. She'd found her voice and used it. She'd made a choice about her future, and it felt right. But as she drifted toward sleep that night, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still ahead. Caleb had retreated, but he'd do so with wounded pride and empty pockets. Pike had lost his easy path to the water rights, which made him more dangerous, not less. The storm was coming. Elena could feel it gathering like the thunderheads over the peaks, dark and heavy with the promise of violence. She just hoped she'd be strong enough to weather it. The answer came sooner than expected. 3 days after Caleb's confrontation, Elena was teaching Lucy about comfrey root when William came running up the path, his face pale with fear. "Miss Elena, Papa says you need to come quick. There's men at our place, lots of them." Elena's blood ran cold. "What kind of men?" "Pike's men. They've got Mama and Papa surrounded. They're saying—" William's voice broke. "They're saying, if you don't come and bring that paper, they'll burn our house down with everyone inside." Jonah, who'd been splitting firewood, dropped the axe and crossed to them in 3 strides. "How many men?" "I counted 8. Maybe more in the trees." William was shaking. "Papa told me to run, to get you and come back with help." "Smart boy." Jonah's mind was clearly racing, calculating odds and options. "How long ago was this?" "Maybe 20 minutes. I ran the whole way." 20 minutes. Not much time, but maybe enough. Jonah looked at Elena. "You know what they want? I won't let them hurt the Harpers because of me. If you go there, they'll take the deed and probably kill you anyway. Pike doesn't leave witnesses." "Then we don't give them what they want." Elena's voice was steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "We give them something else." She ran inside and grabbed her mother's sewing kit, dumping its contents on the table. At the very bottom, beneath thread and needles and buttons, lay the deed. Elena stared at it for a moment, this piece of parchment that had caused so much trouble, that represented her mother's hope and her father's greed and Pike's ambition. Then she grabbed a blank sheet of paper from Jonah's supply shelf and began to write, copying the legal language as closely as she could manage, making it look official. It wouldn't hold up to serious scrutiny, but in dim light, from a distance, it might buy them time. "What are you doing?" Jonah asked. "Making a decoy." Elena's hand moved quickly across the page. "If Pike wants the deed badly enough to threaten children, he's desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. Or they burn houses down with families inside. Not if we get there first." Elena finished the fake document and folded it carefully, tucking it into her dress pocket. The real deed went back into the sewing kit, hidden beneath the false bottom she'd created. "William, can you ride?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You're going to the Callahans. Tell them what's happening. Tell them we need every able body at the Harper place as fast as they can get there." She turned to Jonah. "You and I are going to end this." "Elena, I won't hide anymore." Her voice was fierce. "Sarah stood with me when my father came. I'll stand with her now." Jonah looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the exact instant he made his decision. "All right, but we do this smart. We don't give Pike any advantage we don't have to." They saddled horses with frantic efficiency. Smoke for Jonah, Molly for Elena. William rode Ash, the sturdy gray, racing off toward the Callahan homestead while Jonah and Elena headed east toward the Harper place. The ride was brutal, pushing the horses as fast as they dared on the mountain trails. Elena's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Sarah trapped. Lucy and the baby in danger. David outnumbered and outgunned, all because of a piece of paper Elena's mother had hidden 20 years ago. "We're going to fix this," Jonah said, as if reading her thoughts. "Whatever it takes." "Promise me something," Elena said. "If it comes down to a choice between the deed and the Harpers, we choose the Harpers. It won't come to that. Promise me." "I promise." Jonah's voice was grim. "The paper isn't worth a single life." They crested the ridge overlooking the Harper homestead just as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Below, Elena could see the house, a sturdy log structure with a split-rail fence and a barn. Horses clustered near the porch, more than 8 as William had said. Men with rifles stood in a loose perimeter around the building. And on the porch, Sarah stood with Lucy in her arms and the baby strapped to her chest, David beside her with his hands raised in surrender. Pike sat on his horse in the center of it all, looking for all the world like a king surveying his conquered territory. We're too late, Elena whispered. No. Jonah's hand covered hers on the reins. We're exactly on time. This is where we make our stand. He clicked his tongue, and smoke started down the slope, Elena following on Molly. They rode slowly, deliberately, giving Pike's men plenty of time to see them coming. Pike turned in his saddle, a smile spreading across his face when he recognized them. Well, well, the mountain man and his prize, right on schedule. They reined in at the edge of the clearing, still mounted, still mobile. Jonah's rifle rested across his saddle, casual but ready. Let them go, Jonah said. Your business is with us, not them. My business is with that deed. Pike's eyes fixed on Elena. You bring it? Elena's hand moved to her pocket, touching the folded paper there. Let them go first. Not how this works, sweetheart. You hand over the deed, then I'll think about letting these good people live. You're lying, Sarah called out from the porch. Don't give him anything, Elena. One of Pike's men moved towards Sarah threateningly, and David stepped in front of his family, his expression fierce despite his empty hands. Touch them, and you'll regret it, Jonah said quietly. Pike laughed. You gonna stop me, Reed? You and what army? This army. The voice came from behind them. Elena twisted in her saddle to see riders emerging from the trees, John Callahan with his two oldest sons, the Mitchell brothers, Old Tom, and at least a dozen other men she recognized from the valley. They spread out in a wide arc, rifles ready, faces grim. Pike's smile faltered. This doesn't concern any of you. The hell it doesn't, John Callahan said. You're threatening our neighbors, on our land. That makes it our concern. I've got legal claim to those water rights. You've got nothing but a gang of thugs and a reputation for violence, Jonah interrupted. And you're surrounded by people who are tired of men like you taking what doesn't belong to them. Pike's men shifted nervously, looking at the settlers closing in around them. They'd signed on for intimidation, maybe some light theft. Not a war with every homesteader in the valley. Stand down, one of Pike's men said. This isn't worth dying for. Coward, Pike spat. But when he looked around, Elena could see him doing the math. 20 armed settlers against 8 hired guns. Even if he won the fight, he'd lose men he couldn't afford to replace. Here's how this goes, Jonah said. You and your men ride out of this valley. You don't come back. You don't threaten anyone here again. And in exchange, we let you leave with your lives. And the deed? Stays exactly where it belongs, with the people who'll use it fairly. Pike's jaw clenched. You think this is over? You think I'll just walk away? I think you'll do what smart men do when they're beaten. You'll cut your losses and find easier prey. Jonah's voice hardened. Or you'll die here. Your choice. The standoff stretched out, tension thick enough to choke on. Elena watched Pike's face, saw the calculation behind his eyes, the weighing of pride against survival. Finally, Pike yanked his horse around. This valley is not worth the trouble anyway. Let's go, boys. His men needed no further encouragement. They mounted quickly and rode out, following their leader back toward the lower valleys. Elena watched them until they disappeared, her heart still hammering against her ribs. Only when they were truly gone did Sarah sag against David, her brave facade crumbling. Oh, thank heavens! Thank heavens! Elena dismounted and ran to the porch, pulling Sarah into a fierce hug. I'm so sorry. This was my fault. Stop. Sarah pulled back, her hands gripping Elena's shoulders. This was Pike's fault, and your father's fault, not yours. The other settlers gathered around, checking on the Harpers, congratulating each other on a crisis averted. But Jonah remained apart, his expression troubled. Elena went to him. What's wrong? Pike's gone. For now. Jonah dismounted, running a hand through his hair. But men like him don't forget. And your father's still out there, probably working with Pike to find another way to get what he wants. Then we prepare. Elena squared her shoulders. We make sure everyone knows the water rights will be managed fairly. We build a community that's strong enough to resist men like Pike. That's a tall order. Maybe. But I've got help. She looked around at the men and women who'd risked their lives to stand with her. We all do. Jonah's expression softened. When did you get so brave? I think I always was, Elena said quietly. I just needed to find a place where bravery mattered. As the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the settlers shared food and stories, turning a near tragedy into a celebration of community. Children played in the yard while adults planned and strategized, building the framework for a future where resources were shared and neighbors stood together. Elena sat on the porch steps beside Jonah, watching it all with a sense of wonder. 6 weeks ago, she'd been sold like property. Now she was helping to build something that mattered, a community based on fairness and mutual support instead of greed and exploitation. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, Elena knew the threat wasn't truly gone. Pike had retreated, but he hadn't surrendered. And somewhere out there, Caleb Ward was nursing his wounds and plotting his next move. The real battle was still ahead. The battle came in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world hung suspended between darkness and light. Elena woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, her heart already racing, and stumbled to the storage room door. The main cabin was hazy with gray tendrils creeping through the cracks in the shutters. Outside, she could hear shouting, the thunder of hooves, and underneath it all, the unmistakable crackle of fire. "Jonah!" She grabbed her dress, pulling it on over her nightgown with shaking hands. He was already down from the loft, rifle in hand, his face grim in the pre-dawn gloom. "They're burning the barn. Stay inside and bar the door behind me." "No!" But he was already gone, slipping out into the chaos. Elena ran to the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. The barn was fully engulfed, flames leaping 20 feet into the air, casting everything in hellish orange light. The horses screamed in terror, and she could see Jonah running toward the corral, trying to free them before the fire spread. Dark figures moved in the shadows beyond the firelight. Pike's men, she was certain. But where was Pike? Where was her father? The answer came with a crash as the cabin door exploded inward, the bar splintering under the force of a boot. Caleb Ward stumbled through, wild-eyed and reeking of whiskey, a pistol clutched in his shaking hand. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Where's the deed?" Elena backed away, her mind racing. The real deed was hidden in the root cellar, buried beneath bags of potatoes. The fake was in her sewing kit. Neither was worth dying for. "It's gone," she said. "I gave it to the Territorial Land Office. It's registered in the valley's name now, not mine." It was a lie, but a good one. The kind that might buy her time. Caleb's face contorted with rage. "Liar! You'd never give up that kind of power." "You don't know me at all, do you?" Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "You never bothered to learn what I cared about." "I know you're my daughter, and you owe me." He waved the pistol wildly. "I fed you, clothed you, kept you alive all those years. You sold me." The words ripped out of her. "You stood on that platform and sold your own child because you couldn't stand the sight of me. Don't you dare talk to me about what I owe you." Outside, gunfire cracked through the night. Elena flinched, but Caleb barely seemed to notice. "Pike promised me $5,000 for that deed," he said, his voice slurring. 5,000. Enough to start over, to be someone important. But you ruined it. You ruined everything, just like you always do. Pike lied to you. Elena's back hit the wall. He was going to take the deed and kill you. That's what men like him do. "Shut up," Caleb lurched forward. "You don't know anything. You're just a stupid, worthless girl who got lucky finding a mountain man desperate enough to take her in." The insults should have hurt. A month ago, they would have destroyed her. But standing here in the cabin she'd made into a home, facing down the man who'd spent 23 years trying to break her, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. "You're right about one thing," she said quietly. "I did get lucky. I found people who see my worth, who value what I can give instead of just taking from me. And that's something you'll never understand because you're so consumed by your own bitterness, you can't see anyone else's humanity." Caleb raised the pistol, his hand shaking. "Give me the deed or I swear I'll—" "You'll what? Shoot me?" Elena stood straight, meeting his eyes. "Go ahead. But you'll never get the deed, and Pike will still leave you with nothing." For a long moment, father and daughter stared at each other across the dim cabin. Elena could see the war playing out in Caleb's bloodshot eyes. Greed versus fear, desperation versus some last shred of paternal feeling. The decision was made for him. Jonah appeared in the doorway like an avenging shadow, his rifle trained on Caleb's head. "Drop the gun, Ward." "Stay back!" Caleb swung toward him. "I'll shoot her, I swear I will." "No, you won't." Jonah's voice was cold as mountain ice. "Because you're not a killer. You're just a coward and a drunk who destroys everything he touches." "You don't know what I'm capable of." "I know exactly what you're capable of." Jonah took a step forward. "I saw you sell your daughter to the highest bidder. I saw you try to steal from her after she'd already escaped you. And I see you now, a pathetic man who'd rather burn down the world than admit he was wrong." Caleb's gun wavered. "She's my daughter. She belongs to me. She belongs to herself." Jonah cocked his rifle. "Last chance. Drop the gun." The sound of more horses approaching made Caleb's head whip around. Through the broken door, Elena could see riders pouring into the clearing. The Callahans, the Harpers, the Mitchells, and others. The valley had come again, drawn by the smoke and fire, ready to defend their own. Caleb looked around at the sea of hostile faces, at Jonah's unwavering rifle, at Elena standing tall and unbroken. His shoulders sagged, all the fight draining out of him like water from a cracked bucket. "I never wanted it to be like this," he said, his voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hate you." "But you did," Elena said, "and that was your choice, not mine." The pistol fell from Caleb's fingers, clattering against the wooden floor. He sank to his knees, his face buried in his hands, and for the first time Elena could remember, her father wept. She felt nothing. No pity, no triumph, no satisfaction. Just a vast emptiness where his power over her had once lived. David Harper entered the cabin, his shotgun at the ready. "We've got Pike cornered in the trees, lost 2 of his men already. The rest are either dead or scattered. It's over." "Where's Pike?" Jonah asked. "John's got him tied up by the stream. Figured we'd let the law deal with him proper, if the law ever makes it out this far." Elena looked at her father, still kneeling on the floor, broken and defeated. "What about him?" David's expression hardened. "He helped set that fire, endangered lives. Far as I'm concerned, he's just as guilty as Pike." "No." Elena's voice cut through the tension. "Let him go." Everyone turned to stare at her. Jonah's expression was unreadable, but she could feel his tension. "Elena," he started, "I mean it. Let him go." She looked at Caleb, this man who'd given her life and then spent 2 decades trying to crush it out of her. "Take a horse, ride back to Prescott Station or wherever you want to go, but if you ever come back to this valley, if you ever try to contact me again, I'll let them do whatever they think is just." Caleb raised his head, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Elena, I don't want your apologies. I don't want your excuses. I just want you gone." She turned away, unable to look at him anymore. "That's the last mercy you'll get from me." David hauled Caleb to his feet and marched him outside. Elena heard him giving orders, someone to fetch a horse, someone to make sure Ward rode south and kept riding. She sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. Jonah crouched beside her. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." Elena looked at him. "If I'd let them punish him, I'd have been doing it for revenge. And I won't let him turn me into someone who acts out of hate. That's his legacy, not mine." Something flickered in Jonah's eyes. Respect, maybe, or understanding. He covered her hand with his. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for. I'm stronger than I gave myself credit for." Outside, the barn fire was being brought under control, settlers forming bucket brigades from the stream. The sky was lightening, dawn breaking over the peaks in shades of rose and gold. Elena watched through the broken doorway as her father was lifted onto a horse, his movements slow and defeated. He looked back once, just once, and Elena met his gaze without flinching. Then he turned his horse south and rode away, disappearing into the morning mist. Sarah Harper appeared in the doorway, her face smudged with soot but her eyes bright with concern. "You all right?" "I will be." Elena stood, brushing off her dress. "How bad is the damage?" "Barn's mostly gone, but we saved the horses. Lost some hay and equipment, nothing that can't be replaced." Sarah glanced at Jonah. "What about Pike?" "Time to deal with that particular problem," Jonah said grimly. They walked down to the stream where John Callahan stood guard over a bound and bloodied Pike. The gang leader's arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by barely controlled rage. "You can't do this," Pike snarled as they approached. "I know people, important people. They'll come looking for me." "Let them come," John said. "We'll be happy to explain how you tried to burn down a homestead with families inside." Pike's eyes found Elena. "This is all your fault, you fat cow. If you'd just given me the deed like you should have." The words cut off in a grunt as Jonah's boot connected with Pike's ribs. "Watch your mouth," Jonah said softly, "or I'll let these good people decide your fate right here and now." Pike spat blood. "You think you've won? The deed's still out there. Someone else will come for it eventually." "No, they won't." Elena stepped forward, pulling the real deed from her pocket. She'd retrieved it from the root cellar while the men were dealing with Pike. "Because as of now, these water rights belong to everyone in this valley equally." She unfolded the document, her mother's careful script visible even in the early light. "My mother hid this deed because she knew what greedy men would do with it. She protected it so that one day it could serve the people who actually work this land. Well, that day is today." "You can't just give away that kind of power," Pike said. "Watch me." Elena looked around at the gathered settlers, the Harpers, the Callahans, the Mitchells, Old Tom, and at least 24 others who'd come to defend their valley. "I'm proposing we create a water cooperative. Every family gets equal access and equal say in how the resource is managed. No one person controls it, which means no one can be threatened or manipulated into selling it." "What about you?" David asked. "You'd be giving up a fortune." "I'd be honoring my mother's sacrifice." Elena's voice was steady. "She didn't hide this deed so I could get rich. She hid it so it couldn't be weaponized against the people who need it most." Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." "It's also the smartest thing," John added. "With everyone holding equal stake, there's no weak link for men like Pike to exploit." "We'd need to file it properly," Jonah said. "Make it legal and binding." "Then that's what we'll do." Elena refolded the deed carefully. "We'll ride to the territorial office together. File the papers as a group. Make it official." Pike laughed bitterly. "You fools, you're giving up the one thing that could have made you powerful." "We don't need power," Elena said quietly. "We just need each other." They left Pike tied by the stream while they discussed the details. By mid-morning, a plan had formed. A delegation would ride to the territorial capital, Jonah, Elena, David Harper, and John Callahan, to file the cooperative papers. The rest would stay behind to guard the valley and rebuild what Pike's raid had destroyed. Pike himself would be handed over to the territorial marshal, assuming they could find one who wasn't in someone's pocket. If not, well, frontier justice had its own ways of dealing with men who threatened children and burned barns. Elena spent the afternoon helping salvage what they could from the ruined barn. Her dress was filthy, her hands blistered, but she worked alongside Sarah and Mary Callahan, moving hay bales and carrying water, part of something larger than herself. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the scorched earth, Elena paused to catch her breath. She looked around at the valley, her valley now, in a way that had nothing to do with legal documents and everything to do with belonging. Lucy Harper ran up, her small face serious. "Miss Elena, is it true you're leaving for the capital?" "Just for a week or two. I'll be back." "Promise?" Elena knelt down, meeting the child's eyes. "I promise. This is my home now, Lucy. I'm not going anywhere." The little girl threw her arms around Elena's neck, and Elena held her tight, this child she'd helped heal, whose trust she'd earned through patience and knowledge passed down from her mother. "You're the bravest person I know," Lucy whispered. Elena's throat tightened. "I'm not brave, sweetheart. I'm just tired of being afraid." "Isn't that the same thing?" Maybe it was. Elena hugged Lucy tighter, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and innocence, feeling the weight of the last week settling into her bones. She'd been sold, threatened, confronted by her father, and nearly killed by Pike's men. But she'd also found community, purpose, and the strength to stand up for herself. That night, after the settlers had gone home and the valley had fallen quiet, Elena sat on the porch with Jonah. The smell of smoke still hung in the air, and the blackened ruins of the barn stood as testament to the violence they'd survived. You could have kept the deed, Jonah said. No one would have blamed you. I would have blamed myself. Elena leaned against the porch railing. My whole life I watched my father destroy good things because he wanted more than he had. I won't become that. You could never be that. Jonah was quiet for a moment. You know this changes everything.
Once that cooperative is official, you'll have real responsibility. People will look to you for leadership. I know, it terrifies me. Good. Leaders who aren't afraid make dangerous decisions. He shifted, his shoulder brushing hers. But you won't be alone. The valley's behind you. And you? Elena looked at him. Will you be behind me too? Jonah met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. I'll be wherever you need me to be. Elena's heart stuttered. In the weeks since he'd bought her freedom, Jonah had been guardian, teacher, friend. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. I need you here, she said quietly. I need you to help me build this thing we're creating. I need... She stopped, unsure how to articulate the tangle of feelings in her chest. I'm not going anywhere, Jonah said. This valley's my home. You've made it that way. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and the sound echoed off the mountains like a promise or a warning. The next morning, they prepared for the journey to the territorial capital. Jonah packed supplies while Elena carefully wrapped the deed in oiled cloth, protecting her mother's legacy for the future it deserved. Sarah arrived early with fresh bread and a tearful hug. You bring that paper back legal and proper, you hear? This valley's counting on you. I will. Elena returned the embrace. Watch over the cabin while we're gone? Like it's my own. Sarah pulled back, her expression serious. Elena, what you're doing, it's going to change everything. Not just for this valley, but for how people think about property and power in these territories. I just want people to have what they need to survive. That's why it'll work, Sarah smiled. Because you're not doing it for glory or profit. You're doing it because it's right. The delegation left at first light, 4 riders heading east toward civilization and bureaucracy. Elena had never been to a territorial capital, had barely been outside Prescott Station in her entire life. The prospect should have terrified her, but sitting tall in Molly's saddle with the deed secure in her saddlebag, she felt only determination. They rode for 3 days, covering ground that took them from mountain wilderness to rolling foothills to the edges of established settlements. Each night, they camped under the stars, and Jonah told stories about his years as a scout, about places he'd seen and people he'd known. You never talk about the war, Elena observed one evening as they sat by the fire. Not much to say about it. Jonah poked at the embers with a stick. Men died. Some deserved it, most didn't. I did things I'm not proud of because I was told they were necessary. Do you still believe they were necessary? No, the word was flat, final. But I believed it then, and that's what haunts me. Elena understood. Belief could justify terrible things. Her father had believed she was worthless, and that belief had shaped every interaction between them. Pike had believed power was the only thing that mattered, and that belief had led him to threaten children. What do you believe now? She asked. Jonah looked at her across the firelight. I believe people deserve dignity. I believe community is stronger than individual ambition, and I believe, he paused, I believe some things are worth fighting for, even if the fight scares you. Like water rights for a valley full of hard-scrabble settlers? Like that. And like you. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning Elena wasn't quite ready to examine. She looked away, her cheeks warm, and changed the subject to safer topics, the route ahead, the supplies they'd need, the arguments they'd make to the territorial clerk. But later, lying in her bedroll beneath a canopy of stars, Elena let herself think about what Jonah had said. He believed she was worth fighting for, not because of what she could give him or what she represented, but because of who she was. It was the first time in her life anyone had fought for her simply because she deserved it. The territorial capital was larger than Elena had imagined, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings, muddy streets, and the constant press of humanity. Wagons rattled past, miners shouted in saloons, and the air smelled of horses, garbage, and ambition. Elena felt small and overwhelmed, but Jonah's steady presence at her elbow kept her grounded. They found the land office easily enough, a squat brick building near the center of town with a sign proclaiming it the official registry of territorial claims. Inside, a clerk with ink-stained fingers and a skeptical expression listened to their proposal. He examined the deed, checked its seals and signatures, and raised his eyebrows. "Water rights to Prescott Valley," he said. "These are worth a considerable sum." "We're aware," David Harper said, "which is why we're establishing a cooperative to manage them." "Highly unusual." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "Most people come in here looking to maximize profit, not give away assets." "We're not most people," Elena said. The clerk studied her, this young woman in a dusty dress with steady eyes and calloused hands. "I can see that." "Well, if you're serious about this, I'll need statements from all parties, signatures, fees paid, and time to draw up the proper documents." "How long?" Jonah asked. "Week? Maybe 2. They paid the fees from a collection fund the Valley had assembled, and the clerk promised to have papers ready by week's end. With nothing to do but wait, the delegation found a boarding house and settled in. Elena spent the waiting days exploring the capital, marveling at the sheer density of people and noise. She visited a proper general store with more goods than she'd ever seen in one place. She stood outside a school and watched children reciting lessons through the window. She even attended a Sunday service at a small church, though she slipped out before anyone could ask questions. On the 3rd day, wandering through the market district, she encountered something that stopped her cold. A woman stood on a platform, much like the one Elena had stood on in Prescott Station. But this woman wasn't being sold. She was speaking. Her voice rang out over the crowd as she talked about property rights, women's suffrage, and the injustices of a system that treated half the population as chattel. Elena listened, transfixed, as the woman articulated thoughts she'd never been able to put into words. The idea that women deserved autonomy, that marriage shouldn't be ownership, that value came from character rather than appearance or utility. "Radical stuff," Jonah said, appearing at her elbow. "It shouldn't be," Elena said. "It should just be truth." That evening, sitting in the boarding house parlor, Elena told the men about what she'd witnessed. "When we file those cooperative papers, I want my name on them, not as Caleb Ward's daughter, but as Elena Ward, independent citizen." John Callahan shifted uncomfortably. "That might complicate things legally." "Then we make it work anyway." Elena's voice was firm. "I won't hide behind a man's authority, even a good man's. This needs to be established as the action of all of us equally, or it defeats the purpose." David nodded slowly. "She's right. If we want a cooperative that truly serves everyone, we can't start by excluding half the population from leadership." The papers were ready 5 days later. The clerk had done his work well, creating a detailed charter that established the Prescott Valley Water Cooperative, with provisions for equal access, democratic decision-making, and protections against sale or transfer to outside interests. Elena signed first, her hand steady as she wrote her name in the official register. Then Jonah, then David, then John. Their signatures joined dozens of others, proxy signatures from Valley residents who'd authorized them to act on the community's behalf. "It's done," the clerk said, stamping the final seal. "Congratulations. You're now the administrators of a legally recognized cooperative. Try not to let it go to your heads." Walking out of the land office with the official papers secured in waterproof oilcloth, Elena felt lighter than she had in years. The deed that had caused so much pain and conflict was now a tool for community benefit. Her mother's sacrifice had found its purpose. "We should celebrate," David suggested. "Proper meal at a proper restaurant before we head back." They found a respectable establishment and ordered steaks, potatoes, and real coffee served in china cups. Elena ate slowly, savoring every bite, watching the other diners and feeling like she'd stepped into a different world. "What are you thinking?" Jonah asked quietly. "That I could have had this." Elena gestured at the restaurant, the town beyond. "If I'd kept the deed, sold the rights, I could have lived in a place like this. Had nice dresses, china cups, a comfortable life." "Do you regret your choice?" Elena thought about the valley, the mountains, the meadow, the cabin, the people who'd become family. She thought about Lucy's trust, Sarah's friendship, the satisfaction of healing and teaching and building something that mattered. "Not for a second," she said. Jonah smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his weathered face. Good. Because I'd have missed you. The ride back to the valley took 4 days, and with each mile Elena felt herself relaxing, returning to the place that had become home. When they finally crested the last ridge and saw the cabin nestled in its meadow, smoke curling from the chimney, she felt her eyes sting with tears. Sarah had kept her promise. The cabin was clean, the garden tended, even some fresh wildflowers in the window. A note on the table read, "Welcome home. Come to supper when you're settled." Elena sank into a chair, the official papers still clutched in her hand, and let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. They'd transformed a tool of oppression into an instrument of community. They'd proven that people could choose cooperation over competition, sharing over hoarding. It was a small thing, maybe. One valley in a vast territory. But it was a beginning. Jonah stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the setting sun. "You did good, Elena." "We did good," she corrected.
Fair enough? He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. What happens now? Now we live, Elena said simply. We build. We help each other through winters and dry seasons and whatever else comes. We teach the children, heal the sick, and make this valley into something worth protecting. Sounds like a plan. Jonah moved to the fireplace, building up the flames. You really think it'll work, this cooperative? I have to believe it will. Otherwise, what was any of this for? Elena unfolded the papers, reading through the legal language one more time. Besides, we've got something Pike and my father never understood. What's that? Each other. The truth about having each other was tested 3 weeks later when the first snow came early, blanketing the valley in white silence and bringing with it a challenge no one had anticipated. Elena was grinding willow bark when she heard the horse approaching, its hoofbeats muffled by fresh powder. She looked up to see a stranger, a young man barely 20, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. "Please," he gasped, half falling from his saddle. "My wife. She's having the baby, and something's wrong. The midwife from Prescott Station won't come this far in the snow. You're the only one who can help." Elena's heart kicked into a gallop. She'd assisted her mother with births before, but she'd never delivered a baby on her own. How far? 8 miles south, past the Callahan place. The young man, he said his name was Matthew Brennan, gripped her arm desperately. "Please, she's been laboring for 2 days. I can hear her screaming, and I don't know what to do." Jonah appeared from the barn, reading the situation instantly. "I'll saddle the horses. Elena, get your supplies." She moved on instinct, gathering everything she might need. Clean cloth, sharp scissors, willow bark for pain, yarrow for bleeding, herbs her mother had taught her could speed a difficult labor. Her hands shook as she packed, knowing that lives hung in the balance. They rode through falling snow, Matthew leading the way at a pace that bordered on reckless. Elena's mind raced through everything her mother had taught her. Breech births, cord tangles, hemorrhaging. Any number of complications could kill both mother and child in minutes. "Don't think," Jonah said quietly, riding beside her. "Just do what you know how to do." The Brennan homestead was little more than a lean-to and a tent, the kind of temporary shelter new settlers built while they established themselves. Inside the tent, a young woman thrashed on a pallet of blankets, her face contorted with pain, her screams echoing across the snowy valley. Elena dismounted and went to her, pressing a hand to the woman's sweat-soaked forehead. "My name's Elena. I'm here to help." "What's your name?" "Catherine," the woman gasped between contractions. "Please, something's wrong. It hurts." Elena examined her quickly, feeling for the baby's position, and her stomach dropped. Breech. The baby was coming feet first, which explained the prolonged labor and Catherine's agony. "Jonah," Elena called, keeping her voice steady, "I need you to boil water and sterilize the scissors. Matthew, hold your wife's hand and talk to her. Keep her focused on your voice." She turned back to Catherine, smoothing the damp hair from her face. "Listen to me. Your baby's turned around, which makes things harder, but not impossible. I've seen this before. I know what to do. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Please save my baby. I'm going to save both of you." The next hour was the longest of Elena's life.
She worked with steady hands and racing heart, guiding Catherine through each contraction, manipulating the baby's position with careful pressure, talking constantly to keep both of them calm. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, instructions given years ago beside other desperate women in other crude shelters. On the next contraction, "I need you to push with everything you have," Elena said. "I've got the baby's legs. One more good push and the shoulders will be through." Catherine screamed, pushing with the last of her strength, and Elena felt the baby slip free into her waiting hands. A boy, tiny and blue and terrifyingly still. No, no, this couldn't end this way. Elena worked quickly, clearing the infant's airway, rubbing his chest with firm strokes. "Come on," she whispered. "Breathe. Please breathe." Nothing. The baby lay limp in her hands, and Catherine's sobs filled the tent. Then Elena remembered something her mother had done once, something that had seemed desperate and strange but had worked. She bent down and breathed gently into the baby's mouth, just a puff of air, then rubbed his chest again. The baby gasped, coughed, and then let out a thin, warbling cry that was the most beautiful sound Elena had ever heard. "You have a son," Elena said, her voice breaking as she placed the infant on Catherine's chest. "And he's perfect." Catherine clutched her baby, sobbing with relief, while Matthew buried his face against his wife's shoulder. Elena turned away to give them privacy, her hands shaking now that the crisis had passed, and found Jonah watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." Elena looked at her blood-stained hands, at the young family weeping with joy, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was why her mother had taught her. This was why knowledge mattered, why community mattered, why helping each other survive was more important than any deed or fortune. They stayed through the night, making sure Catherine was stable and teaching Matthew how to care for both his wife and newborn son. By dawn, mother and baby were sleeping peacefully, and Elena finally allowed herself to believe they would both be all right. "Thank you," Matthew said as they prepared to leave. "I don't have much, but whatever you need—" "We don't need payment," Elena interrupted gently. "Just take care of your family, and when you're settled and someone else needs help, you pass it forward." Riding back through the snow-covered valley as the sun rose pink and gold over the peaks, Elena felt exhausted but profoundly satisfied. Jonah rode beside her in companionable silence until they crested the ridge above the cabin. "You're remarkable, Shad," he said. "You know that, don't you? I just did what needed doing." "That's what makes you remarkable." He reined smoke to a stop, turning to face her fully. "Elena, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered at the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" "When I bought your freedom in Prescott Station, I told myself I was just helping someone who needed help, that it was about doing the right thing, nothing more." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "But that was a lie. The truth is, I saw you standing on that platform, and something in my chest just broke open. You looked so brave and so terrified at the same time, and I knew I couldn't walk away." Elena's throat tightened. "Jonah, I'm not good with words, never have been. But these past months, watching you transform this place, watching you find your strength and help others find theirs." He stopped, swallowed hard. "What I'm trying to say is that I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. And I need to know if there's any chance you might feel the same way." Elena looked at this man who'd given her freedom when she had none, who'd stood beside her against her father and Pike, who'd never once made her feel small or worthless or ashamed. "I've spent my whole life believing no one could want me," she said quietly. "That I was too much, too plain, too ordinary to deserve love. But you've never made me feel that way. You've made me feel seen. You are seen." Jonah's voice was rough with emotion. "Every day I see you, your kindness, your courage, your refusal to let bitterness win even when you had every right to be bitter. I see all of it, Elena, and it's beautiful." Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot against her cold skin. "I care about you too. So much it frightens me sometimes." "Then let's be frightened together." He dismounted and came to stand beside Molly, looking up at Elena with those pale gray eyes that had once seemed so cold and now held nothing but warmth. I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I know you've had enough of people making decisions about your life, but I'm asking if you'd like to build something here. Not just a cooperative or a community, but a life. Together. Elena climbed down from the saddle and stood before him, this mountain man who'd seen past her father's cruelty to the person underneath. Yes, she said simply. I would like that very much. Jonah smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded, and pulled her into his arms. Elena melted against him, feeling safe and valued and home in a way she'd never imagined possible. They stood there in the snow, holding each other, while the valley woke around them and smoke curled from distant chimneys. We should get inside, Jonah said eventually. You've been up all night, and you need rest. But as they walked toward the cabin, Elena felt more awake than she had in years. Awake and alive and ready for whatever came next. What came next was winter, fierce and unforgiving, testing every family in the valley. The cooperative's first real challenge came in January when a brutal cold snap froze the main water source, threatening livestock and families alike. Elena stood with the other cooperative members in the Harper's front room, studying a hand-drawn map of the valley's water sources. There's a spring about 3 miles north that runs warmer, she said. My mother told me about it once. It stays liquid even in the worst cold because it comes from deep underground. That's a long haul for water, David Harper said doubtfully. Better than losing livestock. John Callahan traced the route with his finger. If we clear a path and set up a relay system, we could keep everyone supplied until the thaw.
It
took the entire community working together. Men clearing snow, women organizing the relay schedule, children helping haul water in small buckets they could manage. Elena and Jonah worked alongside everyone else, no longer separate, but part of the collective fabric. On the coldest night, when the temperature dropped so low that exposed skin froze in minutes, the Mitchells' youngest child developed a dangerous fever. Elena trudged through waist-deep snow to reach their homestead, carrying willow bark and feverfew, and stayed through the night applying cold compresses and coaxing medicine into the delirious boy. When the fever finally broke at dawn, Sarah Mitchell clutched Elena's hands with tears streaming down her face. You saved him. You saved my baby. The valley saved him, Elena said gently. Everyone who cleared that path so I could get here. Everyone who's been hauling water so your family could survive. We all saved him. Word of Elena's healing skills spread beyond the valley. By February, people were riding in from settlements 30 miles away, seeking help for ailments both common and complex. Elena treated frostbite, pneumonia, broken bones, and difficult pregnancies. She taught other women her mother's remedies, creating a network of healers who could serve their own communities. The cabin transformed into an informal clinic. Jonah built shelves for Elena's growing collection of medicines and added a second room where the sickest patients could rest while recovering. He never complained about the constant stream of visitors, just quietly made more space and kept the firewood stocked. One evening in early March, after seeing off a settler she'd treated for an infected wound, Elena found Jonah on the porch watching the sunset paint the snow-covered peaks in shades of orange and purple. You're building something important here, he said as she settled beside him. Something that's going to outlast both of us. We're building it, she corrected. I couldn't do any of this without you. You could, but I'm glad you don't have to. He was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said back in the fall, about not asking you to marry me yet. Elena's heart picked up speed. And I think I'm ready to ask, if you're ready to answer. He turned to face her fully. Elena Ward, will you marry me? Not because you need protecting or providing for. You're more than capable of managing on your own. But because I love you, and I want to build this life with you as my partner and equal. Elena looked at this man who'd saved her, stood by her, and never once tried to diminish her. Yes, she said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed in April when the snow had melted and wildflowers carpeted the meadow. The entire valley turned out for the celebration, families bringing food, musicians playing fiddles, children running wild through the grass. Sarah Harper wove wildflowers into Elena's hair, and Mary Callahan lent her a beautiful shawl. Elena wore her mother's wedding quilt draped over her shoulders, its squares catching the sunlight. The ceremony was simple, conducted by David Harper, who'd been ordained as a minister years before. But when Elena spoke her vows, looking into Jonah's eyes and promising to stand beside him through whatever came, she felt the weight of every moment that had led to this one. She'd been sold as property and had chosen freedom. She'd been called worthless and had proven her value. She'd been alone and had found family, and now she was being married, not as a transaction or obligation, but as a celebration of partnership between equals. "I never thought I'd have this," she whispered to Jonah after the ceremony, during the dancing that followed. "A home, a community, someone who loves me." "You always had the capacity for it," Jonah said. "You just needed the space to become who you were meant to be." As summer arrived and the valley bloomed with life, the cooperative flourished. Water flowed to every homestead fairly. Disputes were settled democratically. New families arrived, drawn by stories of a settlement where resources were shared and leadership was collective. Elena's reputation as a healer grew. She trained Lucy Harper and 3 other young women in her mother's techniques, ensuring the knowledge would continue after she was gone. She established a proper clinic in a building the community constructed together, with separate rooms for treating patients and storing medicines. One afternoon in late July, Elena was preparing poultices when she heard familiar hoofbeats. She looked up to see a bedraggled rider approaching, and recognition struck like lightning. Caleb Ward. Her father looked worse than when she'd last seen him, his clothes ragged, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow with something that might have been regret. He dismounted slowly, like every movement hurt. Jonah appeared from the barn, rifle in hand, positioning himself between Caleb and Elena. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Caleb said, his voice a shadow of its former bluster. I needed to see—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "I'm dying, Elena. Consumption. Doctor down in Prescott Station gave me maybe 3 months." Elena felt nothing at first. Then slowly something like pity stirred. "Why did you come here?" "To say I'm sorry." Caleb's eyes were wet. "I know it doesn't change anything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I couldn't die without telling you that I was wrong. About everything. You were never worthless. You were never a burden. I was just too broken by my own failures to see the gift I'd been given." Elena stepped forward, past Jonah's protective stance, and looked at the man who'd spent 23 years crushing her spirit. "I forgive you," she said quietly. Caleb's face crumpled. "How?" "After everything I did, because holding on to anger would poison what I've built here." Elena gestured at the valley, the clinic, the life she'd created. "You took enough from me. I won't let you take my peace too." "Your mother would be proud of you," Caleb whispered. "She always said you were stronger than you knew." She was right. Caleb stayed for 3 days, sleeping in the barn and helping with small tasks as his strength allowed. Elena treated his symptoms, easing his pain with the same remedies she'd used on strangers. They didn't speak much. There was too much damage, too many years of hurt. But on the morning he left, Caleb pressed something into Elena's hand. "This was your mother's," he said. "The only thing I kept that had any meaning." Elena looked down at the small locket, tarnished silver with a faded photograph inside. Margaret as a young woman, smiling at the camera with hope in her eyes. "Thank you," Elena said. Caleb nodded, climbed onto his horse, and rode away. Elena never saw him again, but 6 weeks later she received word that he'd passed peacefully in Prescott Station, and in his final hours he'd told anyone who would listen about his remarkable daughter who'd become a healer and leader. "Do you think he really changed?" Jonah asked when Elena shared the news. "I think he wanted to." Elena closed the locket carefully. "Whether he actually did doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I'm free of him, not because he's gone, but because I chose to let go." As autumn painted the valley in gold and crimson, Elena discovered she was pregnant. The news brought joy and terror in equal measure. Memories of Catherine Brennan's difficult birth, of all the ways childbirth could go wrong. But Sarah Harper and Mary Callahan stood by her, as did Lucy, now 16 and training seriously as a healer. "You brought my brother into the world," Lucy said firmly. "Now I get to help bring yours." The baby came in February during a quiet snowfall that turned the world soft and white. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Elena finally held her daughter, dark-haired and squalling and perfect, she wept with relief and joy. "What should we name her?" Jonah asked, cradling the infant with surprising gentleness. Elena looked at her mother's quilt, spread across the bed, and thought about the woman who'd protected her daughter's future even while dying. "Margaret," she said, "after my mother, so she'll know where she came from." Little Margaret grew strong and curious, learning to walk in the cabin where her mother had found freedom, playing in the meadow where the community gathered. Elena taught her about herbs, about healing, about the importance of standing up for what's right even when it's hard. The cooperative continued to thrive. New wells were dug, irrigation systems established, crops rotated to maximize yield. The valley became known throughout the territory as a model of collective prosperity, attracting visitors who wanted to learn how they'd done it. Elena met with these visitors, explaining the principles that had guided them: equality over hierarchy, cooperation over competition, long-term sustainability over short-term profit. Some visitors listened and tried to replicate it in their own communities. Others dismissed it as impractical idealism. Elena didn't mind either way. She wasn't trying to save the world, just this valley and the people in it. 5 years after the cooperative's founding, the territorial governor himself visited, curious about the settlement that had eliminated water conflicts and maintained peace despite rapid growth. He met with Elena and the other founding members, asking pointed questions about governance and sustainability. "What's your secret?" he asked finally. "How do you maintain order without the usual power structures?" "We don't need power structures when everyone has power," Elena said simply. "Every family gets an equal vote. Every voice matters. And when you give people dignity and stake in their own future, they police themselves." "Remarkable." The governor looked at Elena with something like respect. "You've built something here that challenges everything we think we know about property and governance." "We've just tried to treat each other like human beings," Elena said. "It shouldn't be that revolutionary." But it was revolutionary, and they all knew it. In a territory built on individual claims and competitive resource extraction, the Prescott Valley Cooperative stood as proof that another way was possible. Years passed, measured in seasons and births and harvests. Elena's clinic expanded, serving hundreds of families across multiple valleys. Lucy became a full healer in her own right, eventually taking over many of Elena's duties as Elena focused on training the next generation. Margaret grew into a thoughtful, curious girl who seemed to have inherited both her mother's compassion and her father's quiet strength. Jonah built them a proper house, larger than the original cabin, with room for Margaret and for the patients who needed extended care. But they kept the old cabin too, as a reminder of where they'd started and how far they'd come. On Elena's 40th birthday, the community threw a celebration. Families gathered from across the valley and beyond, bringing food and music and stories about how Elena had healed them, or helped them, or simply shown them kindness when they needed it most. "I never wanted to be anyone important," Elena told Sarah as they watched the festivities. "I just wanted to be valued." "You're both," Sarah said, squeezing her hand. "And you earned it." That night, lying beside Jonah in the darkness, listening to Margaret's soft breathing from the next room, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that auction block in Prescott Station to this life she'd built, a life filled with purpose, love, and belonging. "What are you thinking about?" Jonah asked, his hand finding hers beneath the quilt. "Everything. Nothing." Elena turned to face him. "I'm thinking about how I used to believe my worth was determined by other people's judgment, and now I know it never was. I was always valuable. I just needed to find a place where that value could flourish." "This valley needed you," Jonah said. "I needed you. We needed each other." Elena kissed him softly. "That's what makes this work, the understanding that we're all stronger together than we could ever be alone." 17 years after Elena had been sold for $200, the Prescott Valley Cooperative was thriving with over 60 families. its water management system copied by settlements across the territory. The clinic Elena had founded served thousands, and her students were establishing healing practices in their own communities. On a clear autumn morning, Elena stood on the ridge above the valley, the same ridge where she'd first seen the cabin that would become her home. Margaret stood beside her, now a young woman of 15 with her grandmother's skill for healing and her mother's fierce determination. "Mama," Margaret said, "Lucy wants to know if I'm ready to assist with the Henderson baby next month. Are you ready?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "I think so. I've studied everything you've taught me. I know what to do if things go wrong." "Then you're ready." Elena put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Remember, healing isn't just about knowledge. It's about seeing people's humanity and honoring their dignity, even in their most vulnerable moments." "Like you did with that first baby? The Brennan boy?" "Exactly like that." Elena smiled. "That was the night I truly understood what my mother had been trying to teach me all along. That the greatest power we have is the power to help each other survive." They stood together, looking out over the valley. The neat homesteads, the cultivated fields, the network of irrigation channels that carried water fairly to every family. Smoke rose from chimneys, children played in yards, neighbors called greetings to each other across fence lines. It wasn't perfect. There were still disputes, still challenges, still moments when old patterns of selfishness threatened to resurface. But the foundation was strong, built on principles of equality and mutual support, on the understanding that everyone's well-being was connected. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mr. Jonah hadn't bought your freedom?" Margaret asked. Elena thought about it, really thought about it. "I'd like to think I would have found another way out eventually, but I'm grateful I didn't have to find it alone." That evening, the valley gathered for one of their regular community meetings. They discussed water allocation for the coming spring, plans for a new school building, and a proposal to extend cooperative principles to timber rights in the surrounding forest. Elena listened as voices rose and fell, as families debated and compromised and worked toward consensus. She saw Sarah Harper, now in her 50s, offering wisdom about sustainable resource management, John Callahan presenting a proposal for collective winter storage, Lucy leading a discussion about establishing a formal healing school, and she saw Jonah, her partner in all things, moderating the discussion with quiet authority, making sure every voice was heard. When the meeting ended and families began heading home through the twilight, Jonah found Elena standing apart, watching the dispersing crowd with tears in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern immediate in his voice. "Nothing's wrong." Elena wiped her eyes, smiling. "Everything's right. I'm so grateful for all of this. For you. For the life we've built." Jonah pulled her close, his arms strong and steady around her. "We've built something that will outlast us. Our grandchildren will tell stories about how this valley came to be, about the woman who refused to let greed and cruelty define her future. They'll tell stories about all of us," Elena corrected, "about what's possible when people choose cooperation over competition." They walked home together through the gathering darkness, Margaret running ahead to tend the evening fire. The cabin glowed with welcoming light, and through the windows Elena could see the shelves lined with medicines, the table where countless neighbors had shared meals, the hearth that had warmed body and soul through countless winters. This was her legacy, not the water rights or the cooperative charter or even the lives she'd saved through healing. Her legacy was the proof that one person's courage could spark transformation, that dignity once claimed could never truly be taken away, that love and community could triumph over the darkest cruelty. She'd been sold as property and had become a pillar of strength. She'd been told she was worthless and had proven her immeasurable value. She'd been broken by shame and had rebuilt herself into something beautiful and strong. And standing here in the valley that had become her home, surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was, Elena Ward-Reed knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The mountains stood eternal against the darkening sky, and the stream sang its endless song, and the valley that had given her freedom continued its work of transforming lives, just as she had transformed it, and just as it had transformed her, in the ongoing miracle of people choosing to see each other's humanity and build something better together.